kind of grey blue eyes, depending on the picture you find. You weren't supplied with these, but you may well have an acrylic blue, or I've got some intermediate blue and some black from Vallejo, and the intermediate blue is remarkably grey, but we're after a suggestion, and we're not really going to go mad on the detail here, so I'm just going to take a bit of my intermediate blue, which is quite grey, add some black to it, thin it slightly, and make sure we don't have too much paint on the brush, because we don't want it to go everywhere. And we're going to see if I can. Now, the critical thing about eyes is symmetry. Make sure. Now, and the other critical thing about eyes is that the pupil, you can see already that they look a bit weird because there's a lot of eyeball still visible, but I'm just placing our pupils in the right place, and I'm going to just gently keep dabbing until they get bigger and bigger. What you don't want is to have white visible above and below the pupil, because that's where we end up getting goggle-eyed, and that's where the person looking at your model will go, well, that's a bit odd, something not quite right there, don't like, I'm uncomfortable looking at this here person. So it's not the easiest thing. Eyes are not the easiest thing. It can take a bit of practice, but you don't, like I say, don't have too much paint on your brush, because you don't want it to flood everywhere. You need to be in control. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Given that I'm painting this on camera, I'm bloody amazed it's gone as well as it has at this point in time. But yeah, you need to take the eyeball all the way to the... because much of the pupil will be covered by the upper and lower lid. So you don't end up with a little round dot. You end up with kind of a chopped semi-square shape in many ways. Now, do take your time on this. Go back, have a look, have another review, see if you're happy. Try to get them the same size. Try to get them in the same position. If they're going to be looking straight at you, they've got to be looking straight at you from the same place, or else it won't work. It's probably better to go so far and then go, I could do a little bit more to that, but I won't, because I'm happy with where I've got to. And maybe if I do another figure, I'll try and improve that. the plan is to do some darker lines around the upper and lower part of the eye, or at least the upper part. So you can see on this one here I'm pointing at, there's a little bit of a light line above it. I might just try dealing with that now, but that will hopefully end up being dealt with later on. But I think keep looking at that. I don't like bits, but it's probably the best we're going to get. So they're slightly grey blue at this point in time. Okay, now next thing I'm going to do, these are things that you don't have to do, these are things that I'm going to do. What I want to do is, this isn't, if you get it to that and you're happy with that, leave it at that, be content. You can, I'm going to take some of my intermediate blue, so this will be lighter, and I'm going to, in theory, so it's going to go horribly wrong, don't tell anyone. I'm going to just a little bit. In the centre portion of those eyes, you can see there's just a little bit of a lighter portion in there, so you end up with a darker ring. And then I'm going to go take the black, be ludicrously brave, and I'm going to try and put some, because of the scale, I wouldn't do this on a 35th scale figure, I wouldn't dream of it, but I'm going to attempt to just put a little tiny pupil in the middle. So he's come alive a bit because he's got eyes. They're a little bit starey, but they're all right. So now I'm just going to try and do some lining of these eyes, and I've taken the black red which you were supplied with, and I've got that already on my palette. At the top there, it's darker, it's got more of a darker tone to it than the burnt red, and I'm going to use that with the smallest brush again, and I'm going to make that nice and thin. Still got a good red underlying tone to it. I'm going to take a bit of brown sand into it. And these pieces of card can be handy because you can practice painting fine lines, brush control. But I'm going to try and do an upper lid, or define the upper lid, I should probably say, with this a little bit more than it's already there. Ooh. into the inner portion of the eye. Tip of the brush again. That's looking quite reasonable. And while I've got a darker tone out, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time taking and adding some in between the lips to give definition in there. It's a good darker tone. I'm going to just, it's almost like separating out those portions. And under the nose, nostrils, it's still not really super dark. There you go. Now, that's the kind of thing you could leave there. You'd be very, you could be very content with that. We will take it further. And refine it a little bit. But so far that's going in the right direction, I think. Obviously the shock of zooming right in. Hello, my name is Michael Caine. No, hello, my name is Michael Caine. Hello, my name's Michael Caine. Obviously not. And there we go. Ta-da. So we've done a little bit of shading. We started off with a brown sand, which works as a slightly darker shadow colour. It's not sort of like, it's not, you're not starting right at the mid-tone, and then we highlight up with a couple of passes of basic skin tone in our brown sand here. We can still go further with the highlights later on, but we've got the burnt red and also the black red to help with our shadows, which are here and here. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Okay, so I'm just going to do some further sharpening of some of the shadow lines. So I'm going to make some assumptions now, because I'm adding a little bit of black to the black red to make it slightly darker. And I'm going to use that, not a lot, but I have to assume you've got some black, because it's a basic colour. And I'm going to just start trying to line the eyes a bit more, because I want to define them a little better. I'm using a 4-0 brush. And I'm just gently drawing around and defining the eyes. Mainly on the upper lid, or where the upper lid sits on top of the pupil and the eyeball, just in the recess that's the darkest area. That's where there's most shadow caused by the brow. And it just helps to sharpen up those eyes a little bit. And you could try doing that with just a black red, and it would be fine. And again, I'm now going to do a similar thing on the underside of the nose. And really, like I said, the nostrils aren't brilliantly sculpted, so to a degree I'm having to draw them in. Some figures can have big nostrils sculpted in there, and they're quite easy to pick out. Actually got an even darker tone, just because it is an absolute, you look at a human being and you're going to stick a finger up there, it's going to be dark. So although I like to avoid, for the most part, full on black and full on white in painting figures, just going to separate those lips a bit more. See how I've done there with the nostrils? That helps form. And the shadow under the eye, I might just add a little bit, tiny bit of the same slightly darker into those eyes again, using the back of my fingernail just to check the thickness of the paint. You can see that. Getting my camera angles pretty sorted now. Eventually. I'm now going to use that again. I'm now going to go in and just use that darkest shadow to define around the back of the ear. So we're kind of, you might hear it referred to, as I try and think about picking out the detail, we're kind of just, if you think of the light coming down from here, the darkest shadow will be right in the curl of the ear there, and in that, much like the nostril, it's just a dark pit of earwax. And same on the other side. I'm going to get some shadow under the ear and around the lobe. So the two kind of general, many people paint things in their own way. Mine isn't the right way, it's the way I've evolved and the way I see things now. It's people kind of like what I do, so I guess there's something worthwhile in what I do. And I've been trying to think often the best way to explain certain elements of it to people, about why we paint things in certain ways. And certainly looking at stuff on camera, which is not what you're doing when you're normally painting. You're not thinking about those kind of things. You're not thinking about why you're doing something. You're just doing something because that's what you do. So just making those lines there quite a bit darker. I'm not sure I like that. Well, I might just do it under the chin a bit more with this darker tone as well. Again, these are very thin glazes. I'm trying not to overload those shadow zones, but and here if we think about what I was saying about brush, I'm moving away from the edge into the darkest zone, so the biggest amount of shadow is left in the deepest part of the shadow, so the amount of paint is left in the deepest part of the shadow. I think that makes sense. But yeah, very thin paint. If you don't see what you want to see, you just let it dry and then do another layer. So we're defining the jawline now with that shadow paint. Not beautifully done. So there's still lots of things we can do. You could do to make him certain elements jump out a bit better. We haven't painted his hair, obviously, or his collar. There's certain tricks that can be done to well, I'll come to that in a minute. Kind of breaking down elements of painting, which apply to all portions of any figure. There's so to summarise, there's the base coat, nice and clean, even coverage, that we can have a nice base to put these translucent layers on. It's then, well, I guess it's adding in the details such as the eyes, but then you'll get into things like what I call, so with the highlights and shadows we're giving it form and shape, and to make it look a bit more interesting, if somebody saw it they'd go, ooh, that's yeah, what's going on there? There's something more to that than just the way the figure, just a bunch of paint on a face. Then you start going into special effects, what I call special effects, and those effects are 5 o'clock shadows, and it could be rosy cheeks, or little subtle tonal colours. We see variations in the face. This is almost a basic face that we'd all recognise and be perfectly happy with. I'm perfectly happy with this. And I guess I just, in order to finish off this element again, I'm just going to take a little bit of the burnt red, which is a very deep red tone, and will work quite nicely, I think, to make, if you look at your own lips, for example, they are not red, they're dark red. So I'm just going to do a very simple glaze, so a thin layer. If you're an armour modeller and you're aware of the term, it's like a filter of this. You don't want it to flood, you just want to change the tone of that upper lip and lower lip to give it a bit of redness. Just a tiny bit more. That's not perfect, but put a bit more life into his last thing I'm going to do before we break and call this portion done is going to put get a little bit more brown sand, so the base colour. And I'm going to move the palette. I'm going to thin that right down. And when I say thin it down, I mean proper thin it down. You can see that's very watery, and this is where we can, if I can, and I don't know, there is an issue with the camera quality here, I'm going to have to admit that. You can see maybe here on the neck there's a highlight kind of colour I did and a shadow colour, and it's quite abrupt. But we can see if I can do this on camera, zoomed in a lot. With the very dilute, oh that's too much on my brush, but very dilute probably too dilute maybe. I'm doing that very gently, and this is what you might read and understand as feathering. So we're just very gently doing a very translucent layer between the dark and the light with a mid kind of colour, and that's going to be almost imperceptible, but it's going to dry so that that transition isn't quite as abrupt. Now I hope that that is visible, because it looks visible to me as I'm doing this now. I'm doing this on camera, I'm not looking at the actual piece, so I'm doing it on that other side in there. And you can use that, so this edge here between the highlight and let me see if I can get it. Now this is this portion of it, when you're doing this kind of bit, isn't going to be quick. This is where it might take a little bit of time. This is where, when people say, oh, figure painting acrylics takes forever. Well, it doesn't have to, but depending on how you want it to look, those super smooth shadings, you do have to do this. You do have to go and even out. These are very little subtle short brush strokes. I'm using the 4-0 round still. As I go into that shadow zone, which a lot of that is still, there's an optical effect there of just the actual physical shadow. But you can use the translucency of acrylic paint to soften what might look like precariously. You see that area we did before, it's softer, still there, then you might have to go back and do it again. That's why it takes some time. So you'll see, you might see photographs online of somebody who has done some initial painting of a face and it looks really rough, and by the end of it, it looks really smooth. And that is effectively what they're doing. They've kind of sketched it like this. Argue that what we've done already is a sketch. So, quick. Just defining where you want your highlights and shadows, and then there's a lot of toing and froing of glazes and feathering to neaten things up. Now you can almost see it's way too it's almost like he's been wearing goggles and he's got suntan around his cheek. He's been in the sun. The way that paint looks, so that could do quite a bit of softening. I'm doing this on camera, not doing it by eye, so it might not be perfect. I'm not even sure if I'm touching it. So much of this is how translucent your paint is. And I hope you can get an idea of what you want to do to paint the shapes and volumes in a face. Okay, I'm not going to record every single step of this. This is laying down a base colour now, and it's going to be blondish hair, but we're going to start off dark. So for this I'm using a brown, which in this case is German camouflage medium brown. Upper browns would probably do. Got some on the palette. I'm going to thin it and I'm going to paint it in the same way I did for face, just a base coat with a clean several layers. So that's my introduction. I'm not going to hang around and film everything for this. I'll join it all together into one video. But yeah, so thinned paint slightly. I'm trying to get a feel if this is the right colour. And then we're going to end up highlighting. But this could well be the most boring video in the world. The key thing is where the hair is touching the face that we painted so carefully. I'm touching it with the tip of the brush and pulling away. So the tip of the brush is where it's joining next to the hair, the skin, and so I'm not trying to move my brush towards, because I could slip and ruin all that hard work I've done. So carefully doing it in that direction now. This is going to take a couple of coats because I've thinned it quite nicely because I want it to flow. So the hair part too. So I did that base coat of brown, and now I'm going to start adding the same kind of effects of volume, shape that we did with the flesh. So you could almost say this is probably the darkest tone for the hair in this case. And I've now ruined it probably because I hit the camera. I've got some Iraqi sand, which is just a lighter brown, effectively blonder colour, and I've added it there to the base colour, and I'm now just, it's about 2 to 1, 50-50 I should say, and I'm I'm now just going to start on the highlights. Now the thing is, with painting hair, is that we're not going to try and paint every individual hair at this point, because that can just look a bit daft. We're painting zones of colour so that it's picking it up on where the light is catching the top. So we want this to be I'm not doing that very well. I'm not even seeing it properly this way. So why is my focusing gone so badly? So this is quite general. I'm just keeping it on the upper portions, as if light is going to catch that area. And you can see that I'm treating it in zones of hair blocks as opposed to individual hair. Not completely covering it, still letting the sculpting of the hair assist us. What's going on with my eyesight all of a sudden? Personally, I feel that the hair in this case is maybe overly sculpted. Sometimes it's nice to have hair that isn't too heavily it's kind of a mix between wanting to be sculpting individual hairs and keeping just general form, as it were, of hair volumes of bits of hair, if you know what I mean. So we can see the hair, which maybe could be a little bit too greyish in tone, a bit too dirty. It needs a little bit of a pickup. I've got a couple of paints in the background now that may come into it to give it a bit more of a blonde feel. It's kind of a dirty blonde at the moment, but then depending on when you look at this film and the stills of Michael Caine, although I guess I'm not really trying to make this exactly Michael Caine, but it's the inspiration for the figure. You see, I'm quite comfortable with my flesh tones, but hair is always an adventure, because if you're doing a figure from World War II, they might have a helmet on and you don't actually see a lot of hair. What I'm going to do, because I just feel it's a bit flat and uninspiring, I'm going to use some of this golden yellow, which may or may not be too much. as a ball. Deary me. I'm going to mix just a little bit of that into that first lightning colour. And I've now got probably a little bit more of a blonde tone as opposed to a dirty so that will hopefully dry. Nice thing is I can always go back, and if I don't like it, just go and coat it again with that brown. I've got a very yellow tone. A little bit more interesting, I think, with that yellow tone added to it. I'll dry a bit, not quite as intense as it currently looks when it's wet, and that's something you'll find. I quite like that. I'm still trying not to pick out fully the individual hairs, just giving the shape and form of individual bits of blocks of hair. It's a nice little come back here. A curl of hair almost coming over, cascading over. You'll see I'm trying to paint in the line of the hair, not dry brushing it or anything like that. I'm painting in the direction of the flow of the sculpting of the hair. If you were to try, you could dry brush this, you could certainly try it. You'll end up with an effect you might like. Personally, I'm not a big fan of dry brushing on figures because it ends up looking dry brushed. But you can see how here we've now got that zone, and then another little block there, and another block on his temple, and then his sides. I'm not sure how much more I'd want to add to the highlights to this. I quite like it that there's still quite a bit of shadow going into his hairline, where the volume of hair in the shadow is looking quite good, and because the paint is relatively thin, every time I put a little bit more on, it's just highlighting that. And it just goes to show as well, I'm using the size 1. This is the largest brush to do this. I'm not going in with super fine brush. I think you're getting a feel of how to approach the hair, that we're not doing it trying to capture every individual piece, but we're getting the shape of the flowing of the hair, the volumes of the hair. I'm going to continue with this mix and just carry on painting that hair. Right, we're into the home straight, and I did a little bit more highlighting, adding a little bit more of golden yellow to one or two areas right at the very top. I also mixed some black in with the base brown colour there, and just used it in the areas of deeper shadow, so just above the ear to create the shadow from the bulk of the hair under the quiff, and in one or two areas just to give a little bit more depth. But now I'm going to do some of the last remaining bits, which are the collar and the lacing and piping on that collar. Now, he represents an officer of the 24 foot, and the main part of the collar is green, so I'm using this green. Black Forest green is someone I happen to have. A lot of my greens are a lot more olive in colour, because I tend to do a lot of Second World War figures, especially Americans. So, but I do happen to have this, so I'm going to add some black to this and base coat that collar at the beginning. So a not very exciting video in many ways. So scale 75 colours are pretty decent and they dry up pretty flat. The reason I'm adding black to it, because I don't really want the vibrancy of the green on its own. So I can always add highlights to it. So now, obviously, you can go check out photographs of Michael Caine in the movie to see the colour of this. Because I'm overpainting the grey primer, the initial coat comes through quite light and vibrant. I'm not a fan of overly bright effects. So I will probably I'll do a couple of coats to get this looking nice. Now, looking at photographs of the collar and the details of it, you have what looks like a line raised and some gold lacing with some white piping around it. Now, I won't use any gold. I'll do kind of a yellowy, brown to yellow for the gold, which, although in real life that gold would be a gold lace, a gold thread, I don't want to use metallic, so there'll be kind of a non-metallic effect using kind of standard and non-metallic metal gold colours that people might use, which can be fun, and we'll add a little bit of jazz to the figure. Now, probably didn't have any of that on video. I'll go back and yeah, so that's coat one. You can see stuff coming through. It's quite lively green, probably not too bad as it stands like this. So I will continue forth, and let's see if I can do this better on screen. In scale 75 colours do dry ridiculously matte. They have a very matte feel to them. And they tend to dry quite quickly as well. And they actually have a really nice range of metallics. Not relevant to this, but the pigment in them is incredibly fine, and so work well on figures where you don't want huge pigmentation bits to kind of come crashing through. This is one of those where the areas I started painting are already dry, so I can kind of go through with this another coat. That's probably a really good green for, so that's the forest green and the black added together. Okay, so that's the main part of his collar. The facings, I believe it would be, in a uniform sense. And I'm going to pause that now and go and hunt out some colours for... I'm going to base coat all the elements of the collar and then come back and do the details. So, okay. It would have been a boring video to watch, so this is very, very brief. I looked at quite a few photographs and this is the way I've interpreted the collar. So we did the green, and then there is some yellow gold lacing, it's called, and for that I have begun with giving it a base coat of, in this case, very, very old, but English uniform is the colour from Vallejo, which is this brown. You could have used it for British battle dress, but it makes a good starting point for that will end up being really quite yellow at the end. And I've used for the white silver lacing starting point of pale grey blue, which looks quite white at this point in time. So the idea will to make that look a little bit more interesting by the end of the process. So very, very short video, this one. Again, you could leave it where it is, it'd be perfectly fine, but that's not our intention here. probably one or two bits I can see that need a bit of a touch up, but that will happen during the course of painting. Okay, cheers. Okay, so I'm now going to try and do some of the gold lacing using, I've lost it already, can't believe I've lost it. No, there it is. Gold brown, which is here, and just basic flat yellow, which is next to it. And I will be using some of the ice yellow. Oh, it wasn't ice yellow, was it? It was light yellow as well, and probably some white in the process as well. So first stage is just going to be taking some of the gold brown, adding it to the English uniform just to make a slightly lighter version of that, and just make it sort of flow off a brush, and put on my goggles and hopefully with that behaving itself on the brush, I'll start at the back just so it's an area that's out of sight. I'm just going to start applying it to more of the raised areas of that sculpted in lace pattern. Now, this isn't going to be easy because the lace pattern is probably arguably inconsistently sculpted. It doesn't help us. But more than anything, you're wanting to capture the upper areas, so there's still some areas of shadow of the English uniform in the inner portions of the lace. A little bit better there, coming down. This isn't a direct, having looked at the photos, this isn't a perfect representation of the lace. And the sculpting gets a little bit weaker around the back of the neck. Now you can already see that this side compared to that side already starting to get some shape and definition to those little twists and turns in the lace. I'm going to try and pick out, probably not with too much paint on my brush now. The important thing here is that we're after an expression of the lace, not a perfect representation of the lace. I'm also going to use it just to gently form a bit of interest on, or shape, raised area on the lower portion. Now I'm going to stick to this side so we can see the contrast between the two. Now I'm going to do pure gold brown. I am using the 40 brush. Now, like I say, you're perfectly at liberty just to leave it, paint it a nice yellow colour and be done. This is just the way I'm doing it. I'm just showing you a way of doing it. There's always a lot of different ways and approaches we can use. There we go, it's starting to get a little bit more vibrant and interesting. Again, the detail is kind of lost as it gets around the back of the neck on the sculpting and casting. It's easy to do when you're sculpting to maintain this intricacy of sculpting is quite tricky, so So remember, at this stage it's purely, that's a little bit of gold brown all on its own. There's still no yellow as such in this. So you can see how the impression of the colour is coming through. Now I'm going to take the yellow and add it to my gold brown. So we've kind of just gone from, you can see the difference here between, that's our base here and that's our next colour highlight. I guess you could call it a highlight or deep part of this process. I mean, I'm even liking it at this point in time. And you can see how I've gone up quite a stage. The brush is probably a little bit too big for some of this, quite tricky to use. So I'm just going to gently dab it across the upper edge of that lace. And the idea is that we're always leaving areas of the underlying darker colours, just to give it some shape and volume and interest. Going on there. And you know what's coming next. I'm going to go almost pure yellow this time. Thin it down a little bit more. See how that's now much more vibrant because we're going for the pure flat yellow. Remember as well, even if you feel you're going to get some paint on the green, you can always go and put another bit on top of that. I tend to I've twisted that model around so that I can get paint on. Ooh. Paint onto that part of the lace. The bits I got on there, yeah, quite like that. So there you go, much more interest between the two sides. I'll probably do a little bit more around the back with this brighter yellow. Because if we are thinking about where the light is coming from, there would be the light is still coming down here, so you might even get a bit of a shadow, or you could leave a portion of it darker. Think about where you want the light to catch this lace. And then the last thing you could do is I'm going to take that light yellow and add it to my base yellow. And I'm just going to, in theory, hopefully, again you can now see again. I'm just going to take some selective dots on the upper area, effectively, just where you could almost imagine this gold thread catches the light, shimmers slightly. We're just making it pop out a little bit. So there you go. Some areas I might refine, but it's getting tricky to do on camera because I'm trying to get in close, which isn't easy. So I'm going to stop this. You can see the contrast between the two sides. Okay, I have now done both sides. I could probably refine it a little bit tatty around the bottom, but the sculpting there you'll find is a little bit loose. The definition of the line of the bottom lacing isn't very sharply defined, but I've done both sides basically. One's a little bit better than the other. I'll probably go and re-refine bits and pieces. I've also taken some dark black brown colour, which is the hair colour actually, with some black, and just used it to line really carefully, separate out the silver, white, grey of the lining at the top, and just to sharpen some of those bits. But the point is here is just to illustrate how I've done it, so you can go back and refine it infinitesimally. So now I'm just going to deal with the insignia on the shoulder, on the collar patches, and quite tricky to work out exactly what they are. It would be nicer if they were. I might have to go and look that up a little bit better, but it's definitely a light colour. I'm going to treat it as silver, so I'm actually going to take the intermediate blue that I had used, because it's on the desk, I'd used as part of painting his eyes. I often find well, actually thinking about that, it's already on the palette, and it's a wet palette, so in theory it is usable still. So that's the beauty of the wet palette, and yes it is. So I've got the grey I used. I'm going to mix some of that grey with the intermediate blue, which is quite grey in itself. And here I'm just going to, I just want to give a bit of depth to this thing that could well be a line. I've gone in quite pale at this stage, and now I'm going to add a little bit more. And the basic principle is we're just darkening bits and pieces and using it to line and define the shapes that the sculpting has, which, like I say, is not necessarily brilliant. I'm not gonna... This is one of those things now where to hand sculpt something like this is actually quite tricky. But if you were doing it digitally, you could make it exactly what you want it to be. So I'm trying to keep all these shadows or all these lines I'm doing on the lower edge, and they're kind of like just doodling in many ways, just giving the hints of the, because we're still looking at it with a light from above kind of principle. So just look a little bit rough, and then all we're going to do is go back to our grey colour we started with, super light, whatever it was, pale grey blue again, which isn't particularly blue, just as the intermediate blue isn't very blue. And now I'm just going to use that to, if it was thin enough to actually flow off my brush. I'm just going to try and get the paint to go on the upper surfaces. It's almost like a light dry brushing. We're using the side of the brush mostly to get the paint on the most raised elements of a sculpt, and just leave that darkness in the shadow. Weird, that one. And then just quickly look around my desk for white. I'm just going to get some pure white, colour I don't use very often. We'll find out how white pure white ends up being. Come on. I've got a bit of brass in a pin vise, and I often use it on my older paints because these can clog up slightly, just to get the paint to, in theory, flow out a bit better if I haven't mixed it enough. So I've got some pure white there, and I am going to thin that down quite a bit, and then I'm just going to do some little tiny highlights just on the very upper edges of a few points, just to, which might be tricky to see in the video. See, they've now got a bit of form, a bit of shape. What I'm also going to do with that pure white is just I've been touching up and just tidying up with that pale grey blue, the lacing on the neck, on the collar edge. I'm just going to take some of this white, and I'm just going to use it on the very apex of the very top, under his chin. Again, I don't think it's the nature of this. I'm just going to take and do little tiny dots, which the video doesn't really show very well. Do little tiny dots across it, which wasn't my original intention, but it adds this impression of stitching potentially of the lace. Go. I think, other than me going back and doing lots and lots of tweaking on for my own purposes, I think that the core part of him is now done. Now I shall refine some bits and pieces, but yeah, that is the end of Michael Caine. What I've also done, and I'm going to mount him and just show him another video at the end, where I painted black on the underside of the neck, which will go into the display plinth with a little bit of a gap, and I think think we're there. So yeah, you can see the lace a bit. Cheers, good luck. I will return with a little bit more, but yeah, good luck with yours. Looks quite cool now. Always surprised when I finish a piece that I end up liking him more than I thought I would. And I like him. So yeah. My piece of card illustrating how I've used it to dab paint off my brush, and a nice grey backdrop for the camera. So yeah, cheers all.